Good morning, Tri-Cities. This is Karl Dye from TRIDEC, and this is Coffee with Karl. We've got a great program set up today. We are excited to welcome Jerrod MacPherson and Matt Rasmussen from Benton County, the Benton County Administrator and Assistant Administrator. We've got Keith Johnson from Franklin County, the Franklin County Administrator. Morning, Keith.
Morning.
And also welcome back to the program, Rick Dawson from the Benton-Franklin Health District. Rick's a senior manager there, and I can't remember the exact specialty, Rick, but welcome back this morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, it's exciting to have you guys on. The course in today's program, we're going to talk about what each county and the health district is doing, working together to move our collective counties potentially from stage 1 to stage 2, what that process looks like, and then how each of us can get involved. So should be a great discussion. As we used to do on Coffee with Karl, we'll talk about maybe coffee or coffee cups this morning. And I got to tell you, I got to go buy some more coffee cups because I'm really running out of them as we do these. This one's from New Orleans. About 3 years ago, I went to a business conference there and was able to take my wife and daughter with me. So when I was sitting in meetings all day, they were able to explore New Orleans. It was fun. Being from the West, it was their first experience with humidity, and I think it was a relatively positive experience for them. So that's my coffee story. Jerrod, you got anything special today for a coffee cup or anything to talk about coffee?
Not really special, just a standard travel mug that my wife bought me. So I use it most every day. Maybe next time I have a really cool coffee mug that my daughter made me that I can bring on, and it's quite the piece.
Nice. Well, we'll have to have you back on.
Sounds good.
All right. Keith, you got a coffee mug or coffee story this morning?
Well, I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but I do have a mug that my grandkids made for me. It's got each of their names across the bottom and a little hand-drawn picture for them. So I do keep that on my desk. Mr. MacPherson the other day suggested that he usually puts this in his coffee cup, but I'm not quite sure if that is appropriate this morning. I haven't started down that road yet either, so
that's
glad to be here.
That bottle looked empty to me, Keith.
Yeah, I didn't recognize that. It's some kind of a new creamer or something.
You need to check what's in Jerrod's mug this morning.
All right. Well, Rick, do you got anything that maybe can top that one?
No, I stole my wife's comeback cup because I couldn't find my own, and put a little Southern pecan coffee in it with some vanilla creamer, and
oh wow,
I'm ready to go because I need the caffeine. That would be my only coffee story. I only drink coffee once a day, and usually it's at work.
There you go. Hopefully in the future you won't have to spend so many hours at work, right? So
that'll change sooner or later.
You bet. Well, let's jump into it. Let's start with Keith. Do you want to talk from Franklin County's perspective, Keith, a little bit about what you're working on at the county with the Board of Commissioners, and then, segue into how the board is the health district board, and talk about that. And then we'll go to Jerrod, and then maybe kick it back to Rick to kind of just talk about what is the process, what's going on, and where do we stand? Sure,
certainly. And thank you for having me, Karl. We appreciate this opportunity to get in front of some of the key business leaders in the Tri-Cities area to help facilitate however we can, moving us forward into reopening our economy and getting people back to work and doing those things that everyone's eager to do. It's certainly no surprise that this has been a bit of a tedious and evolving process. Things change day by day, week by week, as the governor makes new announcements, as we learn more about COVID-19, how it spreads, and what it's going to take to stem the tide of infections. Clearly, we've been very much at the forefront of those discussions and trying to adapt and help us get back to where we're functioning economically. It's no surprise to this audience as well that there has been a fair amount of consternation amongst the Franklin County Board of Commissioners about how much we are required to follow the orders of the governor and what we can do independently to keep our businesses open. That has in and of itself resulted in some challenges with our being able to move forward. As you mentioned a moment ago, Karl, the Board of County Commissioners, together with the commissioners from Benton County, make up the joint Benton-Franklin Health District Board. And so even though Franklin County and Benton County have their separation and are separating separate applications to the state for approval to move into the next phase, we are trying to do that as much in alignment as possible. We simply understand. In fact, if you go talk to people across the other side of the state, they ask you where you're from. If you say Franklin County, there's a lot of people that may not know where that is. So if you say Pasco, there's a few more that know where that is. But if you say Tri-Cities, just about everyone understands that. And so we recognize that Franklin is a small, rural, agriculturally based county. We are uniquely situated compared to other counties, even from Benton County for that matter. There are some unique differences. However, because Benton-Franklin Health District works in both counties, and we don't feel like it's particularly helpful to write two separate applications. We're essentially writing the same one twice, and we will be submitting that probably by next week to the State Department of Health with a full phase 2 recommendation. The Board of Health, and Rick Dawson's going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but the Board of Health is on board and supporting our application to the state to do that. Once we submit that application, there are a number of different things that can happen. The Secretary of Health could reject it outright and say, no, you're not adequately meeting the targets and you need to stay in phase 1 for whatever period of time they say. They could approve it and say, yeah, you're ready to go to phase 2. Or they could come back with what's called a modified phase 1. Some people refer to it as a phase 1.5, which would be opening up some of the or reducing some of the restrictions that phase 2 would allow, but maybe not all of them, and keep us in phase 1 on certain aspects of it. We clearly have a majority of Franklin County voters and citizens that are anxious to return to work safely, follow the social distancing and the personal protective equipment, and, hand washing, all of those things that we've been encouraged from the very beginning to do. Most of our citizens understand those concepts, but it's clearly also a conservative group that does not like being told what to do from Olympia. And so there are a lot of political things at play to make this thing operate the way it is. But the long and short of it is we are moving as quickly as we can to apply to phase 2 status to the State Department of Health. And we hope that they will cooperate with us and work with us to get us to that phase.
That's great, Keith. Thank you. Jerrod, same question to you. Do you want to add on to Keith's comments or talk about Benton County a little bit?
Yeah, it's hard to follow Keith. He just stole all my thunder. So, we're pretty much running in alignment. So everything that Keith said for Franklin is pretty much ditto for Benton. I just add that, I appreciate the health district and the local community. We've been working hard on putting these applications together. Also, the cities of Benton County, they've been really helpful in getting support letters, and the hospitals are submitting support letters, and visit Tri-Cities and the chambers and the ports, and everybody's been really helpful in helping us pull everything together that hopefully we can hold a special board meeting next week and get the county commissioners to approve sending this off to the state.
You bet. That's good. We'll let you go first on the next question so Keith doesn't steal your thunder, Jerrod. I do want to remind before we go to Rick, the audience today, that we are using the question and answer feature. We are looking at those questions. So if you have any questions as we go through this discussion, put it in the question and answer feature on Facebook Live. think you can put it in the comments, and we'll go through those questions. And we might combine a couple of them, but we want to get to those questions. So please feel free to add your questions in the question and answer feature on the Zoom chat that we're on. So Rick, can you talk a little bit more and kind of compound on what Keith and Jerrod talked about the process and the health district's role, and maybe what are some next steps?
So, I mean, some of the next steps have already been taken. I mean, you look at Board of Health approval, health officer support. We're seeing the letters and the letters of support coming in from our medical providers, the hospitals. They have indicated that they're ready and they're working on those and should have those to us and or the county relatively quickly. So those things are moving forward. And some of the things that are going along with this, and knowing that as an area, both Benton and Franklin counties, there's just a number of the metrics or the measurements that the state is asking us to meet, so that we don't meet right now. And, those, specifically kind of align with the case burden. The burden of disease in our community is pretty high right now. We see that our testing capacities, or at least the amount of testing that we're doing, is not quite where they would like us to be based on the number of the case count we have. And we have a little bit of concern with the hospital system in that, as our occupancy in the hospitals, the rate of the percentage of beds that are actually full are fine. The percentage of those beds that are actually occupied by COVID patients is higher than they want us to be. And that might change a little bit as we get more people in the hospital, as they open up with elective procedure. That may actually go down, but we do have a pretty high burden of disease. So in addressing that, yesterday, Dr. Person, our health officer, issued a health officer's order requesting that all citizens, when out in public and in buildings and unable to maintain a 6-foot social distance, wear a face covering. And that's in grocery stores, big box stores, and pretty much anywhere else where you can't maintain that can't guarantee that you maintain that 6-foot distance, which it aligns pretty close to what the governor's order is for workers in those stores, starting I think either today or Monday as well. So from a health district standpoint on the application, we are preparing the narrative and answering all of the questions that go into the application, and have staff working on that, and they're actually working over the weekend to get that done. But we appreciate the county's support. Both Benton and Franklin counties have offered to help us with a number of things that we are going to need going forward, because cases aren't going to disappear. They may actually increase, and we may need some help doing some of the work that we're required to do to follow those cases and ensure that we don't end up with a flood of cases going forward.
You bet. No, that sounds good. And I know from our perspective from TRIDEC, any of our board members that are watching, we are working on a letter that we want to ask our board members to weigh in on, so we can submit a letter for the application as well to be able to support that. And we realize, how critical this is to get it open. But we've got a question that talks a little bit about, applying to phase 2 when we don't meet the metrics. And I think, Keith, you kind of touched on it a little bit. We'll let Jerrod go first this time. But from the county perspective, can both of you talk a little bit about this balance in between reopening our economy, reopening stores, maybe the input that you're probably, I'm guessing, getting constant input from citizens about reopening, and being able to balance that with obviously the health concerns and then the county's role in the health district. But do you want to talk just, I think, generally about that, trying to manage that balance? And Jerrod, we'll go first with you this time.
Yeah, and our commissioners are very aware that our community and our business community is suffering, and they're trying to, like you said, they're trying to balance that suffering with the health and safety of everyone. So we have to find that balance, and we need the community's help to do that. And by following the health officer's recommendation, that's going to go a long way. But it comes down to personal responsibility and working as a team. So if we can start the ball rolling into moving into phase 2 and get our community on board with following the health officer's recommendations, I think that's a I think that's a good, safe balance that we can all look to achieve.
Sounds good. Keith, anything to add to that, or ideas or thoughts?
Yeah,
or what it's like for that
I
balance?
think it's important for us to realize that the metrics that were established by the state are not necessarily hard and fast rules that we have to be in compliance with each one specifically. There's a balancing that takes place with the state evaluation where they look at our overall capacity to handle further outbreaks or an increase in infections. And so it's not clearly just a black and white metric on each item, and we understand that. Our communications with the state, I've been on calls as well as a number of these people have been on calls with Secretary Wiseman and others at the state level who indicated that we do have some level of, I don't know if flexibility is the right word, but if we do really well in one area and not perfect in another, then there's some opportunity for some judgment to be exercised to move to another phase. Secondly, it's important to realize that we are approaching this a little bit like understanding that certain industries may be better equipped to open up than others, that the overgeneralization of the economy shutting down as a whole, and we've already seen that with some specific recommendations for the construction industry, for example, restaurants that are able to do curbside service or delivery, but not in-house customers coming in and being seated. We can find some ways to open up some of those additional businesses with appropriate restrictions to allow them to sell their products or goods and services, but do it in a way that does not create further risk for the community. Last week, the governor, for example, made some new recommendations for the religious community to allow religious services to take place. That's been kind of a key sticking point for some, but not necessarily in his defense, but I think he makes a good point that there was a choir practice where, I don't know, 50 some people showed up for choir practice. One person was COVID-19 positive, and 50 some people then became tested positive thereafter. So we recognize, the governor recognizes, I believe, the need for people to be able to gather, whether it's in a business setting or in a private and religious setting, but also recognize that those are the opportunities for transmission of the disease to take place most easily. And so even though they have begun to allow larger religious gatherings, they are with kind of additional requirements in place to accommodate those things. But the fact that, golf courses, for example, now are open, the construction industry is loosening up. Places where we know we can control contagion of the spread of COVID, we feel we ought to be able to try to get those businesses open as quickly as possible. And so that's kind of been part of our, at least, intellectual focus on this.
That sounds good. And I appreciate that, Keith. That was a great description, that these aren't hard and fast rules. These are the guidelines that the state set up to move into the phase. And I think even when Rick talked about, the percentage of the beds in each hospital that have COVID patients versus the overall bed count is a great one. And that, obviously, to Rick's point, is going to be affected by, are they open to accept their other types of treatment? And that's going to affect that number. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a shortage of COVID capacity in the hospital. It's kind of a measurement that, to your point, should be able to be analyzed and take a look at that. Rick, we've got a couple questions about testing, and we had one come in earlier this week. You talked about maybe one of the measurements that we need to work on or talk about in the application is the ability for local citizens to be tested. I know we talked about it before, but is that coming up? And then does, as the health district's able to do more testing and more testing goes on, doesn't that arbitrarily kind of increase our number of people that we know have the infection? Is that, like, how does that work, and how's testing going? And then if testing is one of those things that we need to add capacity to, can you talk a little bit about what the plans are, or how do we increase that to hit that metric?
Okay, certainly. Let's talk about testing and an increase in testing. It certainly, we test more people, we'll find more cases, but the percentage of positives probably will go down. Right now, consistently in our community, the people that are getting tested are people who are clearly showing COVID symptoms. So we're testing people most likely to have the illness, and running a positive rate in Benton County of about 15% of those samples, and somewhere around 23-24% in Franklin County are coming back positive. If we take and we double or triple the number of people we're sampling, those percentages of positives will probably go down. Case numbers will probably go up, but we'll have a better idea of where the illness is. And to do that, I mean, one is supplies, and supplies have loosened up, at least coming through the health department. We are now distributing supplies to some of our partners, the hospitals, some of the clinics that we've been able to acquire through the state. And doing that, we're also, looking at, can we form some partnerships with people like the National Guard to maybe come in and set up some testing centers that may help us out to increase that capacity as well. And there's some other things that we're doing in testing. We are testing all of our long-term care, skilled nursing facility patients and staff are required to be tested within the last 30 days. Now, in our 2 counties, we had a pretty good head start on that we had done over half of those residents and staff already when that directive came out, and those should be finished. Those are going to show us a few more positives, but what we've seen so far is that our infection rate and number of positives, compared to what early on in this pandemic in the long-term care has severely dropped. We're not seeing nearly the number of positives, the number of outbreaks that, at one point we had, well over 20 outbreaks going on in long-term care facilities, and currently I think the last check was we had 3 that had multiple cases in the last 14 days. So we're doing better there. Where we're not doing well when we talk about caseload, and I always take opportunities to talk about other questions, is caseload is in our younger population. That since the 1st of February, or 1st of May, our infection rate is more than 50, almost 50%, 49% of the people positive for COVID in our communities in May were less than 40 years old. So it's not the same as it was when it originally started. We're not just seeing older people. We're actually seeing younger people that are affected by this and coming positive. Now, how we move forward with that is doing more testing and taking more precautions. And what we've seen as a health district is the longer we've kept people in the stay home, stay safe mode, the more restless they've become and the less compliant with those directives that they've been, thus putting people more and more at risk for spread. And we're seeing that in the increases of cases.
That sounds great. We're just getting ready to welcome 2 more guests, but before we do that, and maybe it's a good segue into the second part of the call today, maybe we can talk about masks. I think that's kind of where we are in the conversation, that what can each of us do that's listening to the call today, and maybe as business owners, what can we do to encourage or require different things? Maybe wearing a mask would be one with Dr. Person's new directive. With that, when we're getting some questions going on out there. First of all, I see Michael coming on. I'd like to welcome Michael Novakovich, the CEO of Visit Tri-Cities.
Good morning. Thank you, Carl.
Morning, Michael. And also Lori from the Regional Chamber of Commerce, Tri-Cities Regional Chamber of Commerce CEO. Good morning, Lori.
Morning.
So yeah, on masks and Dr. Person's directives, and maybe we can start with Keith this time, but Keith, has your Board of Commissioners talked about, we had a question about, there was a video that was done by all the mayors locally and just encouraging behaviors and realizing it, like you said before, it is a balance. And to what Rick just talked about, as we all stay home and stay safe, we kind of get, cabin fever. We want to get out there and do stuff. But with Dr. Pearson's recommendation, not a requirement, but a recommendation on that, any input from the counties on, you know, have you had a conversation about maybe doing something jointly as far as, you know, issuing obviously it's not a requirement. These things aren't necessarily going to be like enforced or something, but any thoughts about that, Keith?
Yeah, I think kind of from the outset, at the very beginning, masks were being encouraged by the public, and it was pretty much voluntary. I think the governor was hoping for lack of a better term, maybe peer pressure, that people would see others wearing masks and somewhat be guilted into the idea that they need to wear them themselves. That has changed to where it's putting a little more pressure on people. That clearly there is disagreement even in some of the medical community about the efficacy of wearing masks. We know that they're uncomfortable. We know that they don't look good on most people. There's a lot of reasons that people don't want to wear them, but I think there's a pretty solid core of scientific evidence to support that it does reduce the number of transmissions of COVID. And so we're taking an effort of trying to encourage more people to wear them. I would invite each business owner or individual for that matter to go to the governor's website. There's a fairly lengthy list of key points that businesses or employers are expected to have in place at the time they do reopen. And business owners are going to want to be familiar with those requirements with respect to personal protective equipment for distancing within an office and making sure that their employees are protected, but also kind of setting that example or that tone for the public that they reach out to. We've had our own internal battles within the courthouse about how much of a requirement it is for our employees to wear facial coverings that deal with the public coming in and out every day. It is a difficult thing, but it is the order of the public health officer, and we intend to follow it and do our best to help others follow those guidelines.
That's great. Jerrod, from Benton County's perspective, where are you guys on masks? Are you, requiring it for members of the staff that are dealing with public, or where are you guys on it? Or any thoughts or suggestions around this? Encouraging or reinforcing the use of masks?
Yeah, right now we're encouraging our staff to wear masks when they can't work alone in an office. If they have a group meeting or whatnot, starting Monday, we're going to require, in accordance with the governor's proclamation as well as the health officer, the use of masks. When we do open up, we're open to the public, limited for the courts and whatnot, and we're encouraging members of the public when they enter the facility to wear masks. We're encouraging all of our business community and the public to wear masks in accordance with the health officer's recommendation. So on a side note, we're also working with Michael from Visit Tri-Cities I saw a question on the Q&A. We're working with Michael from Visit Tri-Cities to get a video out from our commissioners to support the use of masks and helping our community move forward into phase 2.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's why we got all you guys on together, because you're doing my job for me in that segue. And since you indicated Michael, we'll just start with Michael. And Michael, can you kick us off maybe in the second part of this conversation? Talk a little bit about tcopenandsafe.com, and then maybe some of the other work like Jerrod just indicated on some of the video work, and then we'll go over there to Lori to carry on this conversation.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Karl. So Tri-Cities Open and Safe, and you can visit tcopenandsafe.com to learn more. It started out as a conversation between Lori, Karl, and I, and the table just got much rounder as others came in. Of course, we connected with the health district right off the bat, and the counties as well, to talk about how can we safely reopen businesses. And it's recognizing we've got some metrics that we need to adhere to, but also understanding that businesses have a lot of questions and they weren't exactly sure what the appropriate resources were, what were their particular guidelines, how do they develop a safety plan, and there's so much information out there. So the thought as we began to work together and then worked with other business groups was to provide a real easy to navigate, succinct way to deliver this information and provide what's most important to businesses. And in moving this into not only supporting of businesses to protect their employees' health, and their patrons' health, but into a consumer confidence campaign where the community felt comfortable going back out and enjoying these businesses, but doing it in a safe fashion, and recognizing that we've all got a role in this, and it's, practicing social distancing, washing our hands, and of course, wearing our face coverings as well. So on this website, you'll find phase 1, phase 2 guidelines is provided by the Benton-Franklin Health District, which is awesome wealth of information on their website. Kind of a high level look at some important information that businesses no doubt have questions about. Again, that's that development of a safety plan is one of those elements. Lori, Karl, and I created a PSA to encourage businesses to connect to this resource. And so our broadcast partners here in the community have picked up on it. They're pushing that out to our community so businesses can get connected. We're going to do this in English and Spanish. A Spanish version of this was shot earlier today. We talked at the health district about doing educational videos and doing these in English and Spanish as well. And we know there's these things that we need to do, but obviously there's a disconnect, and it's one more way for us to connect with the business community and their employers to make sure that they're adhering to those standards. And then again, back to the community to recognize they've got a role in this, but we can put a regional brand that's really the umbrella for this, that people could recognize across the community. There's a coordinated effort to ensure safety for everyone in our community and people that might visit. And part of that includes a pledge where businesses can voluntarily sign onto this pledge where they're agreeing to adhere to all the guidelines and standards set forth by the state, developed with the CDC and our local health district to ensure safety. And then the mask video, that face covering video that Jerrod mentioned just yesterday, Matt and I were late in the afternoon exchanging some emails about a script for this. So this just came about, the idea of the commissioners and other elected officials getting that message out there and walking it out and showcasing it to the community. And so another touch point as we put another PSA out there for people to really latch onto what we've got to do if we want to find any path to returning to what our new normal is going to be.
Thanks, Michael. That was a great overview. And as always, the first person that goes steals the thunder for the next person. So maybe with Lori.
I've got nothing. I mean, I can go to my next meeting. No, it's all good.
I have to freely admit, I'm guilty of it too, and that's why I bring it up. But,
no, it's all good. I mean, I think what's really clear is that we're all really concerned and excited and eager, and yet understand that there's a lot of shared responsibility in the community amongst all of us to make sure that as we are allowed to reopen, that employers and employees and customers are kind of sharing this responsibility to do this safely. So I was excited because being involved in this coalition, we created this Tri-Cities Open and Safe Coalition, which we mentioned is our three organizations, as well as the health district and a number of other chambers and the downtown groups and cities and ports and counties and whatnot. So we're just trying to identify the barriers that business owners have. There are a lot of guidelines for industries, for specific industries, but there are a lot of small business owners, and I always think, even though, I don't own the chamber, but, we have a staff of 10, I feel like I run a small business. And, while we're working from home right now, at some point, the chamber office, as well as the TRIDEC and the Visit Tri-Cities offices will open. And just like other business owners, I'm concerned about what that means to our employees and to the people that come and visit our building. And what do I need to do as the head of the chamber to make sure that when I bring my staff back, that I can do it safely and not pose a risk to other staff members or to our visitors. So, I think the health district did a great job of putting a safety plan template together that we're using and helping to publicize that can help business owners really delve into the details of what they need to do in terms of training and educating their staff on safe practices within the workplace, on face masks, as we've talked about, bringing people in on staggered schedules, on reducing just using shared resources, whether it's the things in your workroom or not bringing food and sticking it in the conference room table, creating new policies and procedures of whether that's sanitizing, taking temperatures, all of those things. I think where all business owners are really just inundated. Not only are they just really struggling because of the finances and the hit that they've taken to their business, but now they have to create something and learn about these reopening policies. So I was just excited to participate with this coalition and to come up with what we hope is a pretty easy to use template so that each business owner can take into consideration all the things that they need to do in order to safely reopen.
Oh, that's great, Lori, and great explanation of the process. I might just add that we've been working on this for a while, and I think we'd all agree through this whole process, all of our dates are very flexible, and even as we described this morning, the metrics that we're trying to get to, there's some interpretation, and then they're affected by these other factors that we talked a little bit about. And so on this, we were all, for TC Open and Safe especially, we were looking forward to getting to phase 2, realizing now we've had, some of the metrics have changed and gone the wrong direction. And so now we're going through this application process to the Secretary of Health at the state. And I think the common question that we all have from, business owners to just citizens is, what can I do personally to change in my behavior to help affect these metrics? And I think what we're, right now, mask wearing, even though it's not required, even though it's not going to be something that's enforceable, whatever that means, I think what we're all talking about is generating more positivity around masks and greater understanding potentially is that, masks aren't about, I'm not going to get sick if I have a mask on and the, efficacy of that. It's really about, we don't know that we're sick until we show symptoms, and we could be sick enough to spread it before we show symptoms. And so wearing masks is just the best procedure. And I think it's probably a horrible analogy, but I think go seatbelts, right? Like when mandatory seatbelt laws first came out, we all know there was a lot of pushback through them, but the facts show that wearing a seatbelt saved lives. And I think at masks we're the same way. And it's just exciting to hear all this work going on to try to encourage that, because I think that's the nexus we all need. We need to know, like, well, what am I doing wrong, or what can I do differently, or how can I help out to get us to phase 2, to get some of these businesses to the next stage, and how do we do that? So I really appreciate this process and everybody's involvement. Maybe Rick, a question to you. There was a question about some of the increase in the infections, if that's the right term to use for it, and the Tyson's food plant. We all know, obviously, that was in the press, but with the new cases that you're seeing, is it a sector of our community or an industry? Is there a correlation in between, just asking that question? Do you see any pattern in this new uptick, or can you talk a little bit about that?
No, I actually can, and what we are seeing is cases and illness in a variety of places. Obviously there's been a little bit out there about the Coyote Ridge Prison. There's cases there. We're seeing cases in some of our processing plants here and there, not huge numbers like the Tyson thing, but we are seeing them in those places. We're seeing them in essential businesses. Some of your restaurants, some of, our essential facilities that are selling products. We are seeing them there, but by an account, we're seeing them throughout the community, everywhere, and associated with some gatherings here and there. And oftentimes those are not what you would think, the huge gatherings that you're thinking about, but family gatherings. And one of the things that we struggle with is knowing that we need to avoid gatherings, and that's really avoiding gatherings with people you don't live with. And that is probably the most difficult thing for our citizens to do, is to not gather with those that they love, and trying to help them understand that and comply with that, especially when they're locked up at home, so to speak, and it gets restless, and gee, I know that my brother is locked up at home too, so maybe I should go visit him. So you see some of those things like Mother's Day celebrations, barbecues over Memorial Day weekend, and just the overwhelming desire to be together has led to, so I would call it non-compliance with the governor's directive that, can be linked to some of our cases, let alone the workplace exposures. And, Lori talked about opening, their office, and I understand that it's difficult because as a health district, we haven't sent staff home. Our staff have been in the office. We've had to expand our operations so that people like me, I'm located at the Franklin County Emergency Coordination Center most of the time, and not in our office, because in order to be in my office, it's difficult for us to socially distance our staff. So we've moved staff not only over here, but we've also moved staff to our Pasco office to better accommodate, the needs that we have to maintain socially distanced. And, when you look at our staff, they live and breathe COVID-19 all day long, and they have difficulty maintaining the ability to have masks on, the ability to maintain that social distancing. So I can imagine, how much more difficult it is for members of the public who don't have a public health degree, who don't live public health, who don't live disease every day, that this gets more and more difficult. So, we need to look at those sort of things and how to mitigate things going forward, because what we're doing right now is certainly not being as successful as we would like to be.
That's great, Rick. Thank you for that. We do have a question, and maybe keep it moving around. We'll start with Jerrod this time, but if Benton or Franklin County, and so I think maybe that's a question for the application to move to phase 2, or do the potentially modified 1.5. But if we're not approved for phase 2, and instead of modifying it, we go to 1.5 and they just reject it, do we have to wait another 3 weeks to reapply? I think that was maybe from some of the language the governors has used, but do we know the answer to that, depending upon what their reaction is to the application? But Jerrod, do you have any insight on that, or know how that process works, or get anything from the governor's office?
My understanding is that if our application is rejected, we can automatically reapply for 1.5. I think the 3-week time frame is, if you're approved for phase 2, you have to wait 3 weeks before you can apply for phase 3. And Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
That would match my understanding as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo that as well.
So
our hope is that if for some reason our phase 2 application is denied, we can dust it off, clean it up, update it, and make it more reflective of a 1.5 application and get it resubmitted right away.
Okay, that's great. Let's keep it moving around. And Lori, do you want to talk about businesses in the TC Open and Safe Coalition? We know that for all of them, once we do get to potentially a 1.5 or a 2, and some of them do open in a modified way, they're going to need access to PPE and some other items that are in the guidelines. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and some of the work that's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Michael mentioned the kind of this restoring consumer confidence and this pledge. I would just really encourage anyone on the call, whether you're a business owner, if wherever you work, or just a member of the community, to go to this TC Open and Safe website and scroll down and look at the various guidelines for phase 1 and phase 2. Again, we're not at phase 2, but our goal was really just to make sure that we provided information so that as businesses prepare to reopen, that when they finally got the go-ahead, that they were actually ready to do that. And a lot of what's going to be required now, in addition to everything else, is that employers are going to have to provide this PPE to their employees. So without completely letting the cat out of the bag, so maybe we'll just do a bit of a teaser, but we have an opportunity. We received a call a couple weeks ago from a company that's stationed here in the Tri-Cities, part of the 200 locations across the country. But they're going to make a very, very generous donation to our community for helping our small businesses. And so next Wednesday, that is going to happen. And then that's going to kick off kind of this next phase of this, which is collecting more PPE for our small businesses. And our coalition that we've put together will coordinate some drop-off dates, and those the drop-off site will be at our building. And we'll collect this PPE, and then we'll make it available to small businesses. Again, because they're scrambling to either buy it, find it, and so, you know, we probably can't help everybody, but we're going to try to help as many small businesses as we can. So over the next couple of weeks, watch for that. But again, this donation and this drop off will happen on Wednesday, and that's going to kick off kind of a larger campaign for organizations and companies that would like to donate hand sanitizer, gloves, thermometers, masks, you know, any of the PPE that a small business could use to help them open sooner and quicker once, of course, they get that go ahead from the county.
That's great. Sorry if I, if that we're too far ahead of it, but I think that's a great way to put it. Stay tuned.
That's on my list. Yeah, no, it's good.
Okay.
It's good.
Okay. That's perfect. And because he was a guest a couple weeks ago, I do want to give a shout out and put a website out there for Association of Western Businesses, Chris Johnson. They've got a great resource that's statewide. One of the things that they do is actually a thing called PPE Connect. And so if you are a small business owner or looking for some sources of made in Washington PPE, you can go to reboundandrecovery.org. Maybe Tracy can put it up in the chat on the side, but we did want to give a reinforcement of that. You know, we're working on this program. Lori's really spearheading it and looking forward to a way to connect businesses when we get to phase 2 to the items that they're going to need. But beyond that, that's another resource that we can all access. And I think Chris and his staff have done a great job in putting those resources together. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah, can I add this? Well, not in addition to businesses that are looking to purchase it, but it is also for manufacturers to be able to. It's kind of a marketplace. So for local companies that make PPE, they can connect with those that are looking to purchase it. I was talking to Chris yesterday, and I think they can look at their analytics to see where people are that are looking at this site. And I think he mentioned yesterday over 1,000 people within our region had been to that site already. So they're getting great traction.
That's great. I see Michael smiling there, and I just wish that because, you know, if you don't know Michael, Michael is a very, very creative person, and he's done a number of video or musical parodies, just trying to, you know, add some humor and some music to some of these things that we're talking about. And Michael just hit Lori and I up with a great one this morning. And I wish it was at a point that we could share, but stay tuned to that one too, right, Michael?
100%. It was a dandy. You know, if you don't mind me, Karl, while we're looking at these phased approach plans, and there may be opportunities, or if anybody knows of individuals that are working on a statewide basis to develop plans for specific industries. We have energy from different individuals and groups here in our community that are working on phase 3 or phase 4 plans. So, you know, as we mentioned, if you go to tcopenandsafe.com, you'll see phase 1 and phase 2, the industries and associated guidelines there. So for phase 2 for planning purposes. But of course, we're looking for the phase 3, phase 4 as other big businesses begin to plan. And some of those, when we look to the larger events, which would be in phase 4 or any gatherings of 50 plus, the lead times on development of those plans and those events is long. So there's a statewide group right now that's working on meetings and conventions. I just learned that Lori Powell, Water Follies, she was somebody we were working with on large events. She's actually got connected to a group that's working on a statewide plan for large events and how do you safely host those when the time is right. So if there's others that know people that are working on those plans, whether it's, I imagine Lori, Karl, or I, certainly, if you'd let us know, and if we can get people connected in the right place to develop those plans that become a state guideline, certainly happy to put some energy into that.
That's great, Michael. And I think, for all of us in our business organizations, for example, and I'm sure, here with at the county level and definitely at the health district level, we're all, and our staff are all doing things that we never intended to do before the COVID outbreak. And I think, I just like to say that everybody, it's great that we can try to re-identify our roles. And I think for all of us, still support and complete our missions. But in today's world, we're all faced with these new challenges that come out literally every day, and these changing metrics and ways to do it. So, I think it's great to work with this team. I think it is, we're going in the right direction, even though, like say, some of these metrics are challenging to balance. But I think overall, maybe one of the takeaways we can leave with today is that anything we can all do to encourage mask wearing. We did have a question about, are we going to enforce this or something? I want to be really clear, and maybe Rick, you can give some clarity on it. That Dr. Person's statement was really a recommendation. It's not an enforcement. And we talked about this last time, Rick, when you were on with the health district, that even for businesses that are reopening, from the local point of view, from a city, a county, health district, we're not out doing inspections. This is each individual business owner's personal responsibility. I think that's what the mask too. It's our personal responsibility to think about the others, that even if we aren't sick or we don't know we're sick, it's the best thing that we can do. It's literally just like wearing a seatbelt. But Rick, can you talk a little bit about Dr. Person's recommendation?
Well, I think I can. Ultimately,
Okay.
I don't know that I want to call it a recommendation. It is actually an order. It's a request to do these things.
Okay.
While there is no enforcement that is going to go on, other than education, and we encourage anybody who sees one who's not, be compassionate. It's okay to ask. It's okay to suggest, and okay to help, but there isn't an enforcement mechanism for this, and nor would we want to. It's virtually impossible over a short time to do that. Seatbelts, became a recommendation that became a requirement, and over time became you're going to get fined if you don't be wearing one. We aren't there with mask wearing yet. I do believe the governor's order may carry a little more heavy weight for business owners and businesses, but from a local, the public, mask wearing and face covering wearing, it is an order, so we expect people to comply with it. It's not really a polite request. It's this is your order to do this, and you should be doing this, even though there isn't a penalty if you choose not to.
That's great, and thank you for that clarification. That brings greater understanding to that this is an order. We have about 5 minutes left, and I think with the group this size, maybe we'll kind of move into some closing statements. But I just want to thank everybody for your time today. I think it's been a great discussion, and as always, we want to have these weekly meetings where we bring groups like this together, where we can provide some clarity, provide some information, and hopefully answer some questions, so that that we're not relying on other sources of communications, that we can really get the good facts out here. But let's kick it off with Keith. I think you started us off, so we'll have you kick us off for the closing statements.
Okay, certainly. Yeah, I recognize that this is a unique circumstance that the entire community is under, and I'm not an elected official. I work for elected officials, and circumspect about what I say to represent their opinions and views, because they're 3 independently elected folks. But I've been in my career in places where crisis has occurred. I've spent a little time during the Orange County bankruptcy many years ago, and I spent a little time working for the state of Oklahoma immediately following the bombing of the Murrah building. And so I've seen real crisis, and I've seen real communities come together to work to overcome very challenging circumstances. And it's part of why I live in and enjoy living in the Tri-Cities, is the sense of community that we have here, of people willing to work together, to step up, to not be lazy about it, but to actually put their heart and soul into making the economy work, recognizing that it works for everyone if everybody's doing that. So I appreciate having the privilege of working with other leaders around the county, such as yourselves, who are anxiously making this happen. And we recognize both the emotional, not just the financial, but the emotional toll that this has taken on, whether it's people who are directly affected by the infection itself, or the economic circumstances of having businesses shut down, not being able to be employed or go to work and to live their normal lives, not visiting sick relatives that Rick talked about a moment ago. These are very real. We recognize the human impact of the decisions that are being made. We take them very seriously, and we are, and I'm just, personally, my note of being pleased with the way the community has stepped up to respond to this. We clearly have some heavy lifting still to do, but I think with your leadership, we can continue to move in the right direction.
That's great, Keith. Thank you. Jerrod, you're next. Do you have a closing remark you'd like to make?
And again, I get stuck following up from Keith with his.
Sorry, it's just the
comment.
order.
Not that he stole my thunder. He's just hard to follow. And he's so,
You
he's
bet.
so eloquent and thoughtful. So I just appreciate everyone working together. I appreciate the community coming together and trying to move this thing forward in a thoughtful and safe manner, understanding that the community is suffering. We're just here to lend our support and do the best we can and in a safe manner.
That's great, Jerrod. Thanks for being on today. And Rick, do you want to close us out with the statement here? Looks like you're getting called away.
Sure. Yeah, I'm doing another meeting in 60 seconds. So
Okay.
I just want to thank each and every one of you for participating and being good partners, that we're all in this together. And as we move forward with any crisis that goes on, as long as we work together, we have a better chance of coming through the other side successfully. And all of the partners, both business and governmental and the citizens, we can do this. We just got to do it together, and we just got to think about doing it right. And thanks. And I'm gonna drop off now.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Rick. You bet. All right. Now we'll go to Lori.
Oh gosh, I'll just ditto what Keith said. I just feel like it just really resonated with how I feel and what I think about everything. And I just appreciate the opportunity. It's been really great working with the coalition, and just really echo that. Someone said earlier, we all had other things we were planning to do on June 5th, and it certainly wasn't dealing with a pandemic. And we're sometimes not equipped for these things, but there's just great leadership in the community, and just the community in general. I think we can really pull together and do what we need to do to get us to these next phases. There's such care and concern for our small business owners, and I think we can show that by following these guidelines, and in the end we're really helping them to reopen sooner, saving jobs and keeping families together, reducing stress, all these really terrible things that people are experiencing. So and I'll just offer too, if there's things the community thinks any constructive criticism or criticism in general, I guess, or some ideas that you're seeing somewhere else that you think we should incorporate in this. I know that we're all really open-minded, and we're really just trying to do the best thing we can for our community. So please look us up and give us some feedback, and we can see if we can make any shifts and do things a little better or differently.
That's great, Lori, and very well said. Thank you. And Michael. Last but not least.
Well, it's certainly echoing what we heard here. The the community collaboration's been outstanding, and it's one of the things I love about the Tri-Cities. But it's came on strong during this crisis. So good to see. But it's not just the business community. Everybody, all of us, anybody watching, we've all got a role in this, and we've got to do our part if we want to get back to normal. It's going to take all of us, adhering to some practices that are new and maybe somewhat uncomfortable, but it's going to get us where we need to go. So I encourage you, wear your mask, practice social distancing, and wash your hands. You heard it from Mom, you're hearing it from me, but I think everybody in the room would agree. So we can do this thing together, fully agree, and appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you. The Tri-Cities is just an incredible place, and together we're making it even that much better.
That's great, Michael. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your next song, which I hope will have something to do with washing your hands. So, well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning. This has been a great discussion. We really appreciate your time and your work. I think we've heard it here said very well. Let's make sure that we wear masks in public and social distance and wash our hands, and let's keep together. Let's stay together. I would say we're almost over the hump. We'll see how this application goes and then move on from there. But thanks everybody for your time today, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Carl.
You bet. Everybody have a good day.